So I'll wait to just give you lead. This is Magister Buddy, and this is a massive verbs review covering stages 1 through 25. Because this is going to be so big, I don't expect you to take notes on every single little thing, nor do I expect you to copy down every single example sentence. If anything doesn't make perfect sense, go ahead and pause the video, copy it down, and then we can discuss it tomorrow in class. Towards the end, there will be a point, there will be a few example sentences that I definitely want you to copy down, and I'll give you a heads up when we get to that point. For right now, let's go back to the basics. Personal endings. An I verb, meaning when I is the subject, it's going to end in an O or an M. S means you, T means he, she, it, or some unique subject. Mus is we, tis is you all, and T is they or multiple subjects. In the present tense formed out, if, for example, we have porto, I carry, portas, portat, portamus, portatus, portant. Grumio cooks dinner. I hold the money. You all run into the kitchen. And then we have the present tense for the irregular verb to be. Sum es est, sumus estis sunt. Are you all not satisfied? The cook is in the kitchen. Mother and father are happy. And then we have the imperfect tense. The imperfect tense, we take the infinitive, that's the second principal part, chop off the RE, and then add bom, bos, bot, bomus, botus, bont. The reason why the A's are all red is because this is our thematic vowel. That came from the infinitive right here. The BA is in blue because that's our tense indicator. That's our visual indicator that we are dealing with the imperfect tense. Therefore, we translate it as was verbing. Imperfects happen over an extended period of time, not just a moment in time. And then we have our personal endings that we talked about earlier, MST, mustis, NT. So the slaves were walking through the street. Grumio was afraid of the dog. We were sleeping in the bedroom. The irregular verb to be also has an imperfect tense. Eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant. So yesterday we were in the house. We used to be humans, but now we are ghosts. You used to be a student. Notice how these all also indicate something that happened over an extended period of time. And now we have the perfect tense. This comes from our third principal part. Notice how portavi and portavi is right here. So our third principal part is the first person singular, present active indicative. I know that was a lot of words. I'll explain more about that later. So portavi is I carried, portavisti is you carried. We have our tense indicator again here. Sorry, not our tense indicator, but our thematic vowel, the A, coming from the infinitive. Our part of our tense indicator is this V here, because that's from our third principal part. And our personal endings are different with the perfect tense, which is kind of annoying, but it's E, isti, it, emus, istis, erunt. So Clemens heard an uproar. We greeted Caecilius. The farmers hit the merchant. Notice that I just translated the perfect tense as the simple past tense. It's something that happened in a moment. It did not happen over an extended period of time. Now, the irregular verb to be also has a perfect tense. This one is a little bit trickier. It's hard to do this one in just a moment in time. Oftentimes, the way you translate it can be interchangeable with the imperfect. So we also take the base from the third principal part, which is FU, and then add the endings E, isti, it, emus, istis, erunt. So yesterday we were in the house. We were humans, but now we are ghosts. You were a student. So the only difference between this, again, and the imperfect is that this was a shorter period of time. All right, and the pluperfect. All right, so the pluperfect also comes from the third principal part. So notice that all we did was chop off the I here, and we have our base. Our endings are eram, eras, erat, eramus, eratus, erant, and we're going to translate this as had verbed. The point of the pluperfect is that it indicates a past tense that happened prior to another past tense in the sentence. For example, in the palace was a bear, which the king had imported from Italy. In the atrium were sitting guests, whom we had invited to the palace. Salvius punished me because I had fled out of the house. So here the fleeing happened before the punishing. The inviting happened before the sitting. The importing happened before the bear was in the palace. And now we have our infinitives. There are a couple different uses for the infinitives. It could be completing the idea of a main verb. It could be functioning as part of the subject. This is the second principal part of a verb, its dictionary entry. And the first conjugation has the A as the thematic vowel. The second has an accented E. The third, both the regular third and the third IO, have an unaccented E, and the fourth has an accented I. So it is necessary to carry the food. The teacher wants to teach Latin. You ought to drag the wagon to the barn. We want to seize the day. You are able to hear the dogs. And now we have imperatives. All right, so keeping in mind the infinitives, which we just talked about, in order to form the imperative, all you do is chop off the RE, and then you're left with the single imperative. Imperative is just a fancy word for a command. So if you're commanding one person to love, it would just be ama. If you're commanding one person to hear, it would be aude. If you're commanding one person to demand something, it would be pasque. In order to make it plural, so if you were commanding multiple people to do something, you just throw a te onto the end of the singular. So amate, you all love, audete, you all dare, and so on and so forth. Now the negative is formed by taking the infinitive of nole. You make that into the imperative. So this effectively translates as into don't. So this is the singular. You don't. You all don't. And then whatever it is that you don't want that person to do, you put that word into the infinitive. For example, don't love would be, to one person would be noli amara. Don't love to multiple people would be nolite amara. All right, so for example, juvenes tacete, young men, be quiet. You work diligently. You give me money. Sorry, you all give me money. You help me. All right. This next bit is probably going to be the hardest of everything we've talked about because it was learned most recently, so it's just not ingrained in your brain as solidly as the other stuff has been. We're going to talk about subjunctives. First, we're going to talk about the imperfect subjunctive. I think this is the easier of the subjunctives. For the imperfect subjunctive, all you do is take the infinitive, also known as the second principal part, and add your personal endings. So we're starting off with the infinitive, to carry, throwing a T on there for it to be he, she, it was carrying. Throw an NT in order for it to be they were carrying. And it's translated exactly as our normal imperfect. We'll get to the difference between the imperfect subjunctive and the normal imperfect we learned a long time ago in a moment. But for now, just take a moment and look at these. So you've got your infinitive and your personal ending. So audira, audiret. Esse, the infinitive of the irregular verb to be, can also be made into an imperfect subjunctive just by putting a T on the end. Same with welle, to want. All right, so when you see a subjunctive, it can do several different things. For now, subjunctives are cum clauses. They're part of cum clauses. When we first learned the word cum a long time ago, it was a preposition meaning with, but that's not the case here. So if you see a cum and it's not right next to an ablative, it's not a preposition. Instead, it's probably going with a subjunctive as a cum clause. And the way that we're going to translate it is when. So pause the video for a moment, copy down these two sentences, bracket the clause. It'll start with the cum, it'll end in a subjunctive, and I've got them in bold for you. Then translate the cum as when, not with, as in when it's a preposition. All right, here we go. So I got my brackets. I started with the cum, ended with my subjunctive. When the guards were sleeping, the prisoners escaped from the prison. Notice that the imperfect here is happening at the same time as the main verb. So you can also translate it as while. While the guards were sleeping, the prisoners escaped from the prison. All right, so my brackets start with the cum, end with the subjunctive. Modestus, when he was serving in Britain, loved many girls. We could also translate it as while because it's imperfect, so it's happening at the same time as the main verb. So Modestus, while he was living in Britain, while he was serving in Britain, loved many girls. Okay, so now the pluperfect subjunctive. The pluperfect is taken from the third principal part, also known as the perfect stem. Chop off the ending, that E there. You're going to add an issa. So notice all of these red issas here. And then just add your personal endings. So this issa here is your nice, strong visual indicator that you are looking at a pluperfect subjunctive. And you're going to translate it as had verbed, just like we do our normal pluperfects. The difference is that just with our normal pluperfects, it is something that happened prior to the main verb. But we're still going to translate it, the cum, as when. So go ahead and pause the video, copy down these two sentences, bracket the cum clause, because that's what our subjunctives do right now. They are in cum clauses, and then translate the sentence. All right, so I've bracketed my cum clause, cum, to the subjunctive, and then I can translate it. When the slaves had prepared everything, the merchant led the friends into the dining room. And again, I've bracketed the cum clause. It starts with a cum, ends with a subjunctive. When Modestus had arrived at the bridge, the horse stopped. Now, because the pluperfect is indicating something that happened before the main verb, you can translate it as after. So after the slaves had prepared everything, the merchant led the friends into the dining room. Or after Modestus had arrived at the bridge, the horse stopped. All right, real quick, we've got 5 different categories of verbs, 5 different ways of describing them. We've got person, which is first, second, or third, number, singular or plural, tense, present, imperfect, perfect, or pluperfect. Voice is active or passive. We don't know passive verbs yet, so don't worry about that. For right now, everything is active. The mood. This may be a term that's fairly new to you. Up until recently, everything was indicative, meaning it's simply indicating what's going on. Grumio is in the kitchen. The cook is cooking dinner, simply telling you what's going on. The imperative is a command. And the subjunctive, for now, functions with cum clauses. So take a moment and try to, let's identify these. So wolo, because it ends in an O, that means it's first person singular. Because I recognize the form, because it comes from the first principal part, I know that it is present, active, and indicative. Amabas, it ends in an S. That's how I know that it is second person singular. There's a BA in there. That's how I know it is imperfect. Right now everything is active. And this is indicative. The BA also tells me that it is indicative. Porta. This looks like an infinitive missing the RE. So it is second person singular. You're commanding just one person to do something. The command is happening right now. It's present. We know that it's active because you can't command somebody to do something in the passive. And we know that it's imperative because it looks like the infinitive with the RE chopped off. And then dakuiscent, well, it ends in an NT, so that's how we know it's third person plural. It has the isse in there. That's how we know that it is pluperfect and it is subjunctive. We also know that it's active in part because of the NT ending. but we just don't know any passives yet. So